everyone. Sam Shah here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. And today I'm excited to have Jordan on with us. Jordan is one of our really, really awesome clients that, we've only been working with for a few months actually, but, he was able to get a very good outcome in a very short amount of time and finished recruiting for his summer 2023 process a couple months ago. So I wanted to get him on here today and talk to you guys about how he was able to do what he did and, hopefully share some insight that you guys will also find useful for your own process. So with that said, Jordan, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. And if you don't mind, maybe just starting off by introducing yourself a little bit so that our audience can get a sense for who you are.
Yeah, my pleasure being here. And, like you sort of alluded to, right now, just finish up sophomore year recruiting and working at an elite boutique next summer. I come really from a non-target school, Vanderbilt. And, though it's a good school, we don't really have a strong investment banking pipeline. And we don't really have as strong of an alumni network as maybe schools in the Northeast do. And I actually transferred into Vanderbilt from another school from another liberal arts college. And though I always really had an interest in banking, wasn't really having a lot of success going into the program. I'm going into the process, over the previous year. So for context, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Sam, but when I actually would be graduating 2023, but I pushed it a year back when I went to Vanderbilt, when I transferred in. And one of the reasons was I was going through the recruiting process for my other school, and I got a super day with Goldman, and I just, literally it was all technical. It was all behavioral, no technicals, and just had no idea what I was doing. That was the only real interview, second round I got. And I didn't get it, obviously. I didn't know what I was doing and was sort of lost for a while. And the program, and I'm happy to go into some follow-up questions and start to really jump at the throat here.
Okay.
But, I guess the program, and really through some steps that I took before I started the program, which I'm happy to go into, I was able to sort of get myself back on track and recruit for the next season.
Yeah, that's really good context. So long story short, you're at a liberal arts college before you transferred to your current school, and you already actually went through the recruiting process once on your own. And I guess the furthest you got was this Goldman Super Day, but it didn't work out. And then you decided to transfer to Vandy. Was there why Vandy, I guess? Was there something about Vandy in particular, or what made you choose Vandy as the place you wanted to transfer to?
Well, I think it didn't have as much to do with banking. I was obviously, even before banking, I was more into some other political science and other departments that Vandy was really strong on relative to the other schools. So that was really the deciding factor on that front. But definitely it was sort of factor in the consideration that even though Vandy wasn't a target school for banking, I definitely saw it as having a better opportunity for the process, which to some extent was true.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like you said, I feel like Vandy, we worked with a couple other Vandy students before, and I feel like you guys definitely do send people to banking, but it's not a lot, right? But you guys have the financial development program and things like that, which tends to place some people in. So you go to Vandy, and I guess you transferred September of 2021 then? That's kind of when you started at Vandy?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you join Wall Street Mastermind probably like end of February of 2022. So this was like basically after, so you decide to recruit again for summer 2023.
Yeah.
And this was like after a lot of those applications had already opened up, right? Was when you joined Wall Street Mastermind. And so
Mhm.
like, talk to me about like what made you want to join Wall Street Mastermind, I guess, and also like why at that point in time?
Yeah. So, well, basically between when I transferred and like February when I started, like, first of all, recruiting 2022 petered out, and I was distracted with other school stuff, wasn't really committed, and obviously nothing happened with it. So when I decided I was going to re-recruit for 2023 over winter break, I was like, all right, like I'm going to start taking this seriously.
Mhm.
And I had the benefit, which I had the benefit. It was like sort of one of the upticks in COVID, and I was like locked at home. I'm just having like an enormous amount of time on my hands, so I literally just started getting on the phone with hundreds of people and emailing people, and with no real methodical process. And I definitely, like, looking back, I think like definitely like having a little bit more of like of a like long sight over where I was going to end up would have benefited me, because on those first networking calls they're just so cringe, and there's like you don't know what you're talking about, and it's like, oh, so how are the markets responding to the changes in the interest, like just such like terribly thought out questions. But over time, I think like I improved and was able to sort of gain enough confidence to be like the right level of assertiveness on the call, which I think is the biggest thing to be on those networking calls, in order to like to come off as sociable.
Yeah.
Uh, and until February, though, like school started picking up, and while I had been making like definitely more traction than I had in the previous process, like I still wasn't doing that well. Like I had like a PWP interview that I just completely fumbled. Like I was at the point where like my networking part, like my skills in networking were um like definitely at like a sufficient level to get me in the door. But once I was in the door, I was just like falling apart, and I didn't want to have to, and I didn't have the time or the ability to go through the same process of trial by error, just go like wasting a bunch of interviews like I did with these networking calls. So that's when I really started the program, and you know really putting getting rid of the rough edges.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. So basically, you started recruiting again on your own and you started getting interviews again, but it sounds like you were still getting similar results to your interviews for the previous summer. And that's when you kind of just said, okay, enough is enough. Gotta like get better at interviewing so that I don't, before I run through all these interview opportunities. And I mean, for each interview, you basically get like one shot to like prove yourself. And if you don't, then it's kind of a wasted opportunity. So that's kind of the mindset.
Exactly.
Okay, makes sense. So then like, I guess like what made you want to join Wall Street Mastermind specifically then? Because like obviously, okay, so you get to the realization that hey, I need to get better, I need to get some help. There's so many resources out there, right? So like what specifically made you decide, hey, this is Wall Street Mastermind is the one that I want to go with, as opposed to, I don't know, anything else that you could have used?
Well, I think I
And also, I
had.
guess like a follow-up question to that too is like, I don't know how you found us, but what was your mindset at the time? Like, were you skeptical at all? Or, and if you were, like, how did you overcome that? Like, just kind of talk us through kind of that decision-making process.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I definitely had like the Breaking to Wall Street guides and the Wall Street Oasis guides too. And, it's like you could read through those. And I think like you make the same call where it doesn't, it like helps you to an extent. Again, it helps you like get in the door. But at this point, it's like so diluted its impact because everyone has them that it doesn't really help you out much beyond like a significant impact beyond that. And I think I knew you guys from like the first time I was like in the recruiting process. I remember like I had a call with like someone and I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to banking or consulting or anyone else. And like the person was like, well, this is like really just for banking. And if you find out like you're going to go into banking for sure and not like consulting or anything else, then like let us know. I think that sort of stuck with me because I was like at that time like taken aback that like this was like a serious program for that. And not something that is just like helping people out and sort of in a broader stroke, but it was something that's like purpose built for people who are really, really committed to get into investment banking, and you understand how the industry works because you actually were in the industry. And it's something that, beyond that, takes a much more catered approach to it and how it approaches the recruiting process, because what you're like in doing in essence is like perfecting who you are as a person, as an individual. You're not just working on math skills. It's not something you can watch on Khan Academy. And I think I realized that. And I recognized that this was a program that was going to take less of a cookie cutter approach that I needed.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So basically, I think like there's a theme in terms of what you just said, which is one, you had a lot of the most popular resources that everyone's already using out there, but because everyone's already using it, that's not really a competitive advantage. Or like, and I think like that's kind of the same thing as the last thing you said, which is you're looking for something that's not like a cookie cutter approach, because like if all you're doing is using the exact same answers as what's already in the Breaking Into Wall Street guides or the Wall Street Oasis guides, like everyone else is reading the same guides and they're also using those same answers. That's like the definition of cookie cutter, basically, right? And so
Yeah.
like, you're looking for a way to differentiate yourself or like have a competitive advantage over other people who are all doing the same things.
Yeah. And I think to add on that, sorry if it's a little long-winded, but like what you're doing, what like the experience of bringing what the experience of bringing to Wall Street is, for example, versus what Wall Street Mastermind is doing is really like I'm going to use a little bit of my classics education here, but it's like making it like it's like the turning of the soul in a sense, and that way it's like the process of it is time intensive. It involves multiple revisions of the resume of the answers, and that's not something that you can just read from a textbook. It's something that you need a lot of coaching and guidance for, because I mean, at the end of the day, what they're looking for is not someone who's a strong quantitative player, although that is a skill that you need. They're looking for someone who is going to be like a good teammate and someone who's going to be a good analyst. And that's just a much more comprehensive position that you need. I think that you 100% need someone to be there really at your side, guiding you through, as long as you're similarly committed to it.
Yeah. That's a great point. And I guess like I kind of want to ask you about that, because you mentioned for summer 2022 recruiting, when you got to the super day for Goldman and the entire thing was behavioral, which Goldman tends to do that, by the way. They're like very behavioral focused. They almost never ask technical questions in the super. This is something that a lot of people don't know, but you said you just like didn't know what you were doing, and
Yeah.
so you didn't pass the interview. But like, I think that's probably kind of an interesting statement for a lot of students, because we talk to a lot of students and what they typically say is, oh, like behaviorals are easy. Like I know how to, I was just talking about yourself, right? Like I know how to do that. Like I just need help on the technicals. Like I need to learn the technicals. I don't need help on the behaviorals. So like, what do you mean when you say like, hey, you didn't know what you're doing? Was it like you literally like couldn't answer the questions, or was it like you answered it but you felt like it wasn't very good, or like how did you know that you didn't do well? Because I feel like on the behavioral interviews, that's one of those things where a lot of people lack the self-awareness when they mess up on behaviorals. Like if you mess up on a technical question, it's very obvious, right? It's like, oh, I don't know how to answer that question. On a
Yeah.
behavioral, like people can usually, even if they're not expecting a question, they'll make something up, like just BS on the spot, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that was not too bad. Like a lot of people think that it's actually not great, but a lot of people think, oh, that wasn't too bad. Like, so can you talk about that a little bit? Like shed some insight on that? Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I actually like when going out of the interview, just like I think I was so unconsciously incompetent that I thought I did well. Like I exactly what you said, like, oh, I thought like, they asked me like the simple questions about like why, why Goldman, why this division? And I was like, oh, like I gave answers that were sufficient. Like I thought that was it. But then like, when I spoke with my contact who, was pretty high up at Goldman and was lucky enough to actually get the feedback, it was like what they were looking for in those answers, they're smart about it. Is like they're obviously like they're looking for clear, like specific, sometimes quantitative, um, you know, examples that you allude to, which are demonstrating your sincerity over, why banking, why, why are you passionate about finance, those types of things. Like I feel like they could ask you a very hard technical question and they're going to get the same, they think that they could get the same understanding of your proficiency by asking you an open-ended behavioral question, because with the open-ended behavioral question, they expect you to answer with the same type of rigor, which is harder to know because obviously there are many ways of answering such an open-ended question that on the surface seem fine, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, you actually, like most people, you actually came out of the behavioral interview feeling pretty good about your performance because, and that's completely normal. Like, why wouldn't you feel good about your behavioral answers, right? Because if you
Mhm.
didn't like your behavioral answers, then you wouldn't have answered it that way, right? But it was only after you got the feedback from, I guess, your contact that you realized you actually didn't do that well. And so it's like you needed someone to give you that feedback, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And I think that's like really, hopefully that's very eye-opening for our audience because um on the behavioral side of things, like if you're all you're doing is prepping your answers by yourself, it's really, really hard to know whether your answers are good enough, or like whether your answers are exactly what the bankers are looking for, or if there's like still something that you need to improve about your answers, right? Because you can't be the person to like critique your own answers. You need that type of feedback, but typically you're not going to get that from bankers. Definitely not before the interview, and usually not after the interview either, unless you have a really good relationship with them, right? Like most banks, they don't actually give constructive feedback to candidates because they don't want to be liable for, I don't know, like people can say, oh, you discriminated against me, like I
yeah,
should have an offer or whatever, right? So like that's where if you have someone who's actually willing to coach you on your answers before the interview, then you can go in feeling a lot more confident that yes, my answers like match what the bankers are looking for. But also to your point, you made a really good point about like demonstrating your sincerity. I think what you're saying there is that you your answers have to be genuine, right? Like people think that behavioral interviews are just about saying what you think the interviewer wants to hear. But the problem is like your answer, if it's not true to who you are and all you're doing is trying to like say what you think they want to hear, bankers can see through that and it won't really resonate, right? So it's more like you have to draw the Venn diagram between like what's true to me and also what do the bankers want to hear, and you're finding the part that like overlaps in the middle. And those are the things that you want to kind of like construct your answers around, right? And like
Yeah.
that's like at a very high level, but obviously it's easier said than done, right? Um, but okay, so that's really helpful. And then like obviously ultimately, like you said though, the offer you ended up getting for summer 2023 was at an elite boutique bank. So typically what we found to be true, and I don't know if this was your experience or not, is that elite boutique banks tend to be a lot more technical with their interviews. It's kind of like different from the Goldman style interviews, right? Or like they tend to ask harder questions, at least on the technical side. Did you find that to be true as well? Because you interviewed with PWP, you said, and you know your offer ultimately was from another elite boutique. Like, what was your experience with those interviews?
Yeah. So they definitely were more technical. And I think the difference is that I think in their eyes, like they obviously want leaner deal teams. That's a cliche, but to do that, they need fewer analysts. And what they're doing is sort of like using the technicals as the filter round. So they won't even ask you the behaviorals until they know that you are at a very, very high level on those technical questions.
Yeah,
Which I think, so like I think like as you focus on a lot, like it's not just about mastering the technicals, it's also about the behaviorals. But for the elite boutiques, I think you really, really need to have both down,
yeah,
because they're not like, to get in the door for an elite boutique, the difference is it's not just about who you network with, and you do need to, like, you obviously need to network significantly, specifically if you're not at a target, but you also need to really be on the top of your technical game earlier than other people by like sometimes months,
mm.
which adds in a level of complexity because the process for them starts the earliest.
Why do you
And
say
I could go into,
why do you say you need to get to that level like months earlier than other people? I mean, I know the answer, but I want people to kind of understand that.
yeah, so it's not just, well, okay, so as I said, the process starts the earliest for them, but to get in the door at these elite boutiques as a non-target, you're in like a bucket with like all other schools. Like, they have like, at least at my bank, they have like a process for Wharton, and they have a process for, I don't know, Harvard, and then like everyone else. And, if you're not in the investment banking club, like I wasn't at Vanderbilt, and you're not in some feeder non-target program, then you already have to like be really reaching out. You have to be trying to get some very strong referrals from people at the bank. And, that alone is happening, needs to happen like weeks, months before
Yeah,
the process.
got it. So it's just like it's more because you're not a target school for them, and to make it even harder, I mentioned like the FDP earlier, like you're also not in programs like that on campus.
Yeah.
So like it's kind of a double whammy. And so just there's almost like more work or like more stuff you have to overcome to even like be considered, which means there's longer lead time and there's like you have to start earlier basically. But
Yeah.
also to your point, like I mean, when did you get your offer? Wasn't it back in like April or something? I want to say it was like pretty early, right?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, that's like a month and a half, less than a month and a half to 2 months after you start working with us. But like the point being, you don't have that much time if if your if your goal is to get into an elite boutique. Like I always tell everyone, like elite boutiques finish recruiting the earliest, and then like if you haven't gotten an offer by the time your sophomore year ends, like by the time you start your summer, most likely you're not getting an offer from an elite boutique because most of them are done at that point, right? With the exception of maybe like one firm. And then it's like
Yeah.
bulge bracket banks. If you're not done recruiting by like your sophomore summer, I mean, this year it's looking like it'll be done way before the end of summer, but if you're not done by probably like halfway through your sophomore summer, you're probably also not getting into a bulge bracket bank either, right? And then at that point, you're looking at like middle market banks and eventually like lower middle market regional boutiques. So like, this is why like efficiency is so important, because like there is urgency in terms of like how quickly you can get it done, right? Like the timeline does not wait for anyone, and the longer it takes you to get an offer, typically the further downstream you're going to have to go, right? Which I think a lot of people don't realize that. They just kind of think like, oh yeah, all the banks are recruiting at the same time. It's like, no, it's actually, the timeline is very you almost have to, you have to get a lot more granular, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's really good point. But I guess like, would you say then like, because we said, okay, so their technical interviews are harder. Like when we say they're more technical, help people understand what that means exactly. Because like, I mean, all the concepts are the same, right? Like a DCF is a DCF, an LBO is an LBO. Like all the stuff that's in the interview guides, isn't that just what they're asking you then? Or like, what's the difference? How can it be harder, I guess?
Well, the difference is they're not asking you as many like definitions. For me, what the process was is they really wanted to see how good I am like working through the concepts. So they gave me like a line from revenue and they wanted me to give them unlevered free cash flow. So like they just give you revenue. What do you have to ask the right follow-up questions? You have to do the right calculations. Then you have to give them that number. That's just an example of like sort of one of the basic ones that you clearly have to know the concept like inside out, and not just inside out, but at the elite boutiques, you have to know them to like a very advanced level. Like, Evercore is asking like paid in kind, like walking through the 3 financial statements if there's an impact to paid in kind debt, and like those types of things. Like you're not going to get obviously in the 400 questions guide, but it's like those are things that you're going to have to like, I guess from their perspective, they want to see that you're someone who's clearly deeply interested in finance. And I think from like the perspective of the program, it's someone who's you need to be preparing for seriously in the technical questions, to be able to work through them and to be able to at most important level to understand the concepts behind them, which I think your program does very well and help me.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, and for for those in our audience who have no idea what payment in kind means, which I expect to be like 99% of the people listening to this, payment in kind is a type of debt where typically you pay interest on your debt and you usually pay that with cash. For payment in kind, you don't pay it with cash. Your interest actually just accrues back to the principal of your debt, so that for the next period when you calculate interest, you're calculating off of a larger amount owed. That's kind of like the quickest way for me to explain. So it's a more exotic type of debt, and it's definitely more advanced, and a lot of people don't know what it is. But to Jordan's point, like that's the kind of stuff that they're testing you on, right? And so like this and that's a really good point. It's like the only people that will really know this kind of stuff are people that are truly genuinely interested in finance. Like you can't fake this stuff, and like if all you're doing is like memorizing a bunch of answers from the questions in the guides, like they're not asking you the questions from the guides, right? Like asking you for like giving you the revenue line, telling you to work all the way down to free unlevered free cash flow. Like that's not in any guides that you're going to read. So like if all you're doing is like memorizing like a predetermined set of questions, like it's just not going to come up in these interviews, right? Which is why like we don't make people memorize anything from the guides. Like you can use the guides as like practice questions, but like we just have people learn the underlying concepts, and like just if you understand the concepts the right way, it shouldn't matter what questions they ask you, right? You should just be able to explain it, and so that's always the goal, right? But okay, so I mean, bottom line is this: it sounds like one big thing that you got out of Wall Street Mastermind is you got a lot better at interviewing, right? Between like from the time you were interviewing on your own, whether it's passing behavioral interviews, passing technical interviews, to like now that you're on the other side, like obviously you were able to pass some very, very difficult interviews. Last question about the program for you is like, in hindsight, because now that you're on the other side, um, was there anything that you got out of the program or anything you did in the program where now looking back, it's like, hey, if I had done this on my own, I would not have been able to do this, or I would not have been able to do this as effectively. Like, because like I think the question that a lot of people always have is like, what's so different about doing this on my own versus like if I had something like Wall Street Mastermind? Like, what would you say to those people?
Well, I just don't. I mean, I think it's a lot harder to be able to communicate effectively about yourself to bankers than people think, because as we spoke about earlier, those behavioral questions, like it's hard to just get a good sense of whether or not you are giving good answers for. And part of that is just, it's so like to come up with good answers and to be able to like think about good examples is just a very introspective process that by its nature requires external guidance, and particularly external guidance from someone in the field who you're going into. And like, because Wall Street Mastermind has exactly that, like you're going to be in the program, the program is guided by you, and some of the other mentors who really have an understanding of what they're looking for, and an understanding of how you need to work on those sort of skills. I think it's just something that you can't replicate without that.
Got it. Yeah. So the biggest thing is just the feedback, basically. It's just like, yeah, you could do it on your own, but doing it on your own versus having feedback, like it's always better to have feedback. Right. So like there's stuff that you're typically going to miss on your own, or maybe certain blind spots that you don't see. Of course, you're going to try to do your best either way, but when you have feedback, you can kind of like, cover up those blind spots, or not make the same mistakes that you would have made otherwise, is kind of what I'm hearing. Okay.
And I think also, just like a last note, just like also the Slack, the network of people, because like at least at my school too, people think you're crazy if you're starting recruiting for 2023 in February. I mean, at the end of the day, like it's sort of it's a double-edged sword, because no one else knows about how early this process is. And if you are doing it, it's sort of abnormal because of that. So like being able to communicate, just being able to talk with other people who are also deeply invested in the process, who maybe have gone through the interviews, who are willing to help out, was also like very, very, very helpful. And I should have mentioned that earlier, but it was being able to like talk with some of the other kids in the program was also extremely salutary.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, which is we're starting to have this network effect. Now having had, as of today, 500 plus, almost 600 people that have gone to the program. A lot of these people, having interviewed the same places that you're probably going to interview with. Some people, even like some of our oldest alumni, like currently working at these places already, like having that sort of network that you can tap into, especially if you go to a school where you like, yeah, I mean, if you go to a school that like where not a lot of people are trying to do what you're trying to do, like you're almost like you're at a disadvantage in terms of like the information that you have, right? Like just being able to a lot of times crowdsource intel about what's going on with recruiting, like, hey, where are certain banks at in their processes, or what types of questions do they typically ask, or what should I expect in an interview? What do they typically look for? Like, this is all really useful stuff, but this is like not everyone has that type of intel. And also, even if you go to say like a Wharton or something, like we have a lot of students from schools like Wharton where everyone's trying to get into investment banking. So it's kind of the opposite. But even then, it's so cutthroat and people are so competitive that they kind of keep everything to themselves. And it's not like people are typically, sharing a bunch of information with their competition, right? So the beauty of our program is that like everyone's like super collaborative, and people aren't really shy about just sharing information with each other and helping each other out, because everyone's pretty much getting jobs anyway, and there's no scarcity, right? So
Yeah.
Last question for you, man. This has been great, super helpful, but I always like to end with this question, which is, like now that you've gotten an offer and you've gone through the process and you know what it's like, is there like one piece of advice that you want to pass down to other people who are maybe just starting to go through the process now or currently going through the process, like something that maybe someone else told you that really helped you along the way that you can share with our audience?
Like always go into like a call, an interview, even if it's like not necessarily true, just like going with the mindset, if I mess this up, there's always going to be another one. Like there's always going to be, um, another, like, this is just good practice for another interview. Cause don't psych yourself out for those networking calls. Don't psych yourself out for those, first round, second round interviews. Just keep the cool, and just keep a picture in your mind of where you want to go, and
Yeah.
it'll keep you calm.
Yeah, that's a really good one. It's like this has to do with your mindset because yeah, I have seen students who totally psych themselves out because every interview to them is almost like life or death, right? It's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
like I have to get this. And it's important, but I think like you want to have like the right amount of, I mean, you want to be on your toes a little bit, but you don't want to be so overboard where you're like, oh my God, this is do or die. And then like, that actually makes you like really tight. Like you want to stay relatively loose so that you can actually be yourself and let your personality shine. And so I think that having that right balance in terms of your mindset is definitely really, really important. So that's good advice. Awesome, man. Well, look, guys, for those of you that are still with us, if you're like in a similar situation, maybe you go to a school that, isn't like hasn't historically placed a lot of people into banking, or, not a lot of people around you even trying to recruit for banking. Or maybe you've like, kind of already tried to recruit on your own and you've been prepping on your own. Maybe you have some interviews, but they haven't really gone the way that you wanted it to. And you're looking for a way to level up your game without taking like a very cookie cutter approach or like the same approach that everyone else is already doing, then I want to encourage you to reach out to us, see if we can help you. Like, we are by application only and we can't help every single person that we talk to. But like, if you reach out, speak to our team, and we find that you're a good fit based on whatever challenges you tell us you're currently having, then we'd be happy to talk to you about how we think we might be able to help. All right. So if you want to do that, you can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street is abbreviated to ST. So it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you. All right. With that said, Jordan, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us about your process today. And also huge congrats again on a really, really good offer for your junior summer. I'm glad that it worked out for you, and can't wait to see what you accomplish next summer, man, and beyond, really.
Thanks for all the help.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap it up today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and hopefully you guys found this to be helpful, and we'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. All right, talk soon.